Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to deliver this speech. Congratulations on the 30th anniversary of the Graduate School for Social Research. And I would like especially to thank you that in the beginning you have mentioned the name of Professor Wiktor Osiatyński, who was my great mentor, and I know that he really tried his best to contribute to the development of the GSSR. Ladies and gentlemen, I will talk about issues which are, I would say, not purely legal. I will try to, although I'm a lawyer and I don't have a big, let's say, scholar understanding of some other social sciences, but I will try to do my best to interpret the Polish developments, Polish reality over the last couple of years. So that's why the topic of the speech is resistance and fight for rule of law in times of shrinking space for civil society. I was thinking whether to name it resilience, but then I thought that there is already, I can imagine, a lot of theories about what is resilience, and I didn't want to enter into the field. I don't really know that much, but I think that from different examples of resistance and fight, you will be able to develop your own understanding that maybe everything that happens in Poland could be named as some kind of a resilience of the civil society. First of all, I would like to say a few words about the situation that we are right now and how first we had the problem with so-called constitutional crisis. I think the very important date is 2004, when Poland joined the European Union. I think there was this moment when we had a feeling that the big civilizational success is achieved. And we could experience the period of economic growth and stability, but at the same time we could observe growing disparity in income. So not everybody in the Polish society was equally satisfied with the changes that are happening in Poland. Also, we could observe after, in this period between 2004 and more or less 2015, that we had a lot of labor problems and that not, once again, not everybody is a beneficiary of the transformation that happened. I think one of the points that was not sufficiently discussed in Poland, that after 2004, a lot of people emigrated to United Kingdom, Netherlands, I don't know, even Iceland, Norway, and so on. And the whole generation experienced a brain drain. And what is quite striking is that in this moment when people emigrated, Polish authorities were to a great extent satisfied with it because, first of all, they had less problems with unemployment. Second, it meant a lot of additional surplus to the state budget because those people moved a lot of their resources and assets back to Poland. But I think, interestingly, we could feel that in this period, we didn't have a big understanding why rule of law matters. So all those institutions that are important for the rule of law state were built on, like the Constitutional Court, Administrative Court, Ombudsman, independence of judiciary. But I think there was not enough of understanding why they are really important for regular citizens. And in 2015, when Jarosław Kaczyński was fighting for that victory, basically he referred to all different notions relating to social equality, to politics of identity, to promotion of national pride, but also he used, and the Law and Justice Party used, anti-migration rhetoric. But I think this combination of, on the one hand, politics of identity topics, and on the other hand, social inequality topics was as well as a certain dissatisfaction with the operation of the rule of law state, independence, with the operation of judiciary, was a key to the key to the success. And suddenly what was important at that time is that Jarosław Kaczyński was proclaiming that he's going to build so-called Budapest in Warsaw, and it was a clear reference to reforms made by Viktor Orban. The difference is because Viktor Orban had at certain point constitutional majority. In Poland, it was not possible, and even until today, Law and Justice is not having constitutional majority. But in this first period, 2015-2019, Law and Justice had a total control over both chambers of parliament and the loyal president. And this situation allowed to achieve some changes. Maybe I will not go into details because there is a lot of scholarship on this. I would like to recommend a book by Professor Wojciech Sadurski, Poland's Constitutional Breakdown, which is, in my opinion, the best publication describing the process of changes. The book has been also translated into Polish and published by wydawnictwo, by the publishing house Liberté. It is the same think tank that is preparing and organizing so-called freedom games. Maybe some of you want to attend those freedoms games. They are taking place on 15th and 16th October in Łódź. Okay, when it comes to methods, because of this fact that it was not possible to, let's say, adopt new constitution, Law and Justice Party adopted a method of curtailing independence of different institutions using the parliamentary majority, plus there were some instances of simply obvious, blatant violation of the constitution. So as a result, in 2015-16, different institutions have been taken over, such as Constitutional Court, Prosecutor's Office, Public Media, Secret Services, as well as some courts, especially in terms of administration. What I mean here, I mean mostly the possibility to appoint presidents of courts. Please note that in many cases it was not about just simple takeover of institutions, but rather creating a certain restraint on their operation. So they could, let's say, operate, but their role was not to interfere, not to impede the political process. Interesting situation was regarding the Constitutional Court, because the Constitutional Court in the early period was treated as an instrument of opposition. So the taking over of the Constitutional Court was a way to marginalize the opposition and also to marginalize the role of the parliament. So if the parliamentary majority knew that there is no chance for the Constitutional Court to verify any piece of legislation, then the level of parliamentarism decreased, and it was quite easy to adopt laws even within a couple of days. But interestingly, later on, the Constitutional Court has been used in order to achieve certain political goals. And that's why we had some important judgments concerning the accession, concerning the membership of Poland in the European Union, extremely important judgment concerning access to legal abortion, or even judgment that concerned the position of the ombudsman and to what extent the ombudsman may serve in so-called interim period, so after the expiry of the official term, but before appointment of the new ombudsman. To put it simply, I was kicked out from my position of the ombudsman by the Constitutional Court. But I think what is quite interesting that all those reforms were possible because of the very strategic interplay between institutional reforms and the use of public media, use of means of propaganda. So even until today, we listen to different stories how judges were subject of hate campaigns orchestrated by the state. Moreover, the ruling party tried to subordinate the Supreme Court and common courts. In my opinion, they are still in the mood for fighting, but this fight is not on equal terms, and I wouldn't say that we have like full judicial independence in Poland. We are somewhere in between. And interestingly, certainly the moment of pandemics, but also the crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border were an examples how different stages or different methods of exceptionality might be used in order to achieve some political goals. And I think sometimes we do not notice how important is mixing of the imperium and dominium. So to what extent the position of the state as the owner of state-owned companies or other state assets is having impact on the decision-making power of the state. Here is a photo of the Polish Constitutional Code. For me, this photo is quite symbolic because it was the last moment when, in my opinion, the Constitutional Code was still independent. It was the 13th December 2016, and it was the day when the court was adjudicating the case on media freedom in Poland. So I took this photo for myself as a kind of a souvenir for the future. I think here I would like to go a little bit into the reasons why we had this crisis of the rule of law, and I think it is the moment when I enter a little bit the field of your scholar interests. I think the first point is that rule of law was seemed to many citizens as a very abstract value, not having a direct connection to their to people's daily lives. And recently there was a very interesting study published by Professor Jan Winczorek, a sociologist of law, who is claiming that Polish citizens did not react so massively to the rule of law crisis because they didn't have a feeling that courts are really serving their daily needs, that there were not enough situations when the understanding how the courts operate and what is their importance for their lives, that kind of aspect is not creating this kind of a social bond between citizens and judiciary. Second point, which is quite often mentioned in Polish public discourse, is that we didn't really have a comprehensive civic and legal education after '89. It was regarded quite and taught quite on a superficial level. So I think if you would ask like a regular secondary school student how many members of parliament are in the Sejm or in the Senate, they would be able to answer this question. But if you would ask, okay, so what is the value of free readings of the draft law, or what is the value of the what is the role of the Constitutional Code, they would not be able to answer this question. So also, I think we should mention that Poland had a relatively short tradition of building rule of law, because in fact it was just 25, 30 years. And that's why it was relatively easy to transplant some institutions from Western Europe, from Austria, Germany, France, and to put them into the Polish context, Polish legal system, but it was much more difficult to involve citizens or to teach citizens what is the real value of those institutions for their life. Finally, I think one of the reasons for the crisis is that this promotion of social rights and politics of identity by the law and justice was simply much more important for citizens than support to rule of law. And I think I would like to add two more elements. There is a new book by Andras Szajo from Central European University, so another person from this, let's say, big Soros family, who has written the book Ruling by Cheating. So he claims that it is like a very specific system of governance where authorities are using different methods of propaganda, disinformation, hate campaigns, or use of spin doctors in order to administer the state. And it is, in such a situation, it is much more difficult for citizens to understand what is really going on. And finally, because that is when we would look, if we look at the problem from inside, these were the reasons. But I think from outside, please note that European Union, as well as other international organizations, they didn't have a proper instruments to control rule of law. So they were not able effectively to stop the process of changes. And in fact, even right now when we observe the discussion about the recovery funds and their suspension, we see that still we have a problem with effectiveness of the mechanism. If the given state is saying, sorry, we don't care, we are able to live up with that kind of restrictions. Okay. I would like to move right now to the response by the civil society. So I have decided to divide this, some of my comments into, let's say, 7 points about what does it mean that we experience shrinking space for civil society, what is the response, especially in terms of searching new methods of activism, what was the specific response to the rule of law challenge, as well as to liberal reforms, what is the role played by disinformation and hate, and the relationship with the European Union and networking and cooperation with international organizations of Polish civil society. So first of all, shrinking space for civil society. There is a lot of materials, articles, reports by the Fundamental Rights Agency, but also other institutions about this shrinking space for civil society, what I understand as a limitation of access to basic fundamental and political rights, limiting the level of limiting the space for pluralistic discussion, limiting media freedom. So I would like to just give some of, let's say, examples of this shrinking space. First of all, in my opinion, a very important signal that something is wrong is the support to so-called gongos and radical organizations by the government. By gongos, I mean governmentally organized non-governmental organizations. So those organizations that pretend to be NGOs, but in fact they are steered by the government. So we had, for example, Polish National Foundation, or we had different organizations that are maybe even independent or in terms of their construction, but they got the state funding in uncontrolled way. So it creates a completely different dimension of the discussion in the civil society sector, that some organizations are becoming dependent on the state. They are becoming part of this clientelist elite, and that's why they realize they implement certain objectives, targets presented by the government. And here, of course, we should mention the union, the strategic union between the Catholic Church and the government in terms of different actions addressing women's rights and especially LGBT plus rights. Second thing I would like to mention is the silent acknowledgement when there are some actions made by the private organizations, private NGOs, and the government is basically not reacting. Please remember, I remember one instance, first instance of this, when these were events in Radom, I think it was 2016 or 17, and there were protesters from the Committee for Protection of Democracy that were attacked by some neo-Nazi nationalistic groups, and then there was a statement by one of the leaders of the Law and Justice saying more or less like this: oh, if they inspired that kind of emotions, they should not be, right now complain that something wrong happened to them. Or, for example, we are here next to at Krakowskie Przedmieście Street, and just more or less 1 year ago, we had this situation when Jarosław Kaczyński was calling some nationalistic groups to defend churches, and there were some instances of violence, by private organizations that were in fact never penalized and that were indirectly supported by the state. So lack of reaction to hate speech, hate violence, political motivation of the prosecutor's office is in my opinion, creating one more challenge to the civil operation of the civil society. Another point is so-called discriminatory legalism in legal proceedings. This notion, discriminatory legalism, was created by Mr. Kurt Weiland in the Journal for Democracy, and he claims that in countries, in states that are going into this non-democratic direction, you are using the law, but you are using the law in order to target your enemies. So that is why some people that are affiliated or sympathizing with the government are relatively, they don't have some specific problems with the law enforcement machinery, while when you have some activists, politicians, you immediately have those problems. So I think like the recent good example is one of the parliamentary deputies, Joanna Scheuring-Wielgus, who made one act of protest, and right now she's having a very strong case that allegedly she violated religious feelings, her immunity has been lifted, and nobody is even hiding that the whole purpose of this case is purely political. So this targeting of individuals, especially politicians, journalists, journalists or activists is an example of this. And when I mentioned this idea of SLAP, strategic lawsuits against public participation, these are not just legal institutions, but they are institutions, or it is the notion that describes a certain way of behaving, a certain way of targeting some individuals in order to create a chilling effect, in order to distract them from their daily activities. I mentioned Professor Wojciech Sadurski, and he had altogether, I think, 4 or 5 trials that were instigated against him by the Law and Justice Party and by the Polish public television. He has won all of them, but it took him some time to defend himself, and he's not the only one who is facing that kind of a challenge. Another point is the restriction on the use of freedom of assembly. Once again, coming back to Krakowskie Przedmieście, in 2016 and 17, we experienced introduction of so-called cyclical, periodical assemblies. So that assemblies that, so the space and the place and the time of the assembly was reserved from so-called Smolensk commemoration demonstrations, and nobody else was allowed to protest here, which is obviously a violation of freedom of assembly standard. But during the pandemic, the laws have been used in order to restrict possibility to demonstrate, and especially women, but also entrepreneurs suffered because of this in this period of pandemic. And the last development, but really very powerful, very painful, is the use of Pegasus spyware technology. So we know as of now that this technology has been used against leading dissident prosecutor, leading dissident attorney, head of the campaign for the political opposition, head of the organization associating farmers protesting against the policy of the government, and the number of other persons. And I imagine that you know that this technology of surveillance is crossing any limits, and that it is in fact not just wiretapping or some other form of surveillance, but it is something that is regarded as almost like a cyber weapon that could be used against individuals. So all those, so in my opinion, these are just some symptoms, examples of the shrinking space for civil society. Obviously, the government planned to do more to, for example, introduce restrictions on funding for NGOs. But interestingly, recently I have read the report by Professor Angelika Nussberger, who is the OSCE rapporteur under so-called Moscow mechanism. She has published a report on the freedom of on fundamental freedoms and the civil society in Russia. So basically her report is about what happened between 1990 and now in Russia. And interestingly, if you read some of the examples from Poland, and you compare them to examples from Russia, they are more or less like the same. So the method strategies that are used are almost the same, except of course of some. I wouldn't like to make like a very easy comparison, but especially this approach towards fundamental freedoms, towards certain vulnerable communities and minorities, or abusing the state of exceptionality, use of surveillance technologies. It is something that could be. These are activities from the playbook, basically, of autocrats. Okay, but when we are thinking about all of this, what we see in Poland is that Polish civil society was not just observing, but it reacted. So we could observe over last years the emergence of new forms of activism, or maybe not always these were new forms, but those new forms basically appeared on Polish streets or in the Polish public life. So, for example, emergence of the very strong street opposition, especially in 2015, 16, and 17, especially with the presence of the Committee to Protect Democracy and Citizens of the Republic organization. Interestingly, NGOs started to use strategic litigation. And it was, by strategic litigation, I mean conducting different court cases in order to achieve a certain strategic aim. Right now, if you look into the Polish NGO scene, you see that strategic litigation is used not only by rule of law defenders, but also by LGBT plus groups, by women's rights groups, by environmental protection groups, privacy advocates, and so it is basically a method which is used in order to make a change, but also in order to make in order to create public understanding, public awareness of some of the problems that appear in the society. Interestingly, I see that local governments that are still independent in Poland, they cooperate strongly with NGOs, and sometimes the local governments are the place where the civil society may develop strongly. We see also the promotion of constitutional values, some kind of a sense of constitutional patriotism, and I think the best organization in this is the Tour de Constitucja, Tour de Constitution, which is a kind of a event festival of attending 60, 70, 80 cities during the summer period, with something like with some kind of a celebrations, demonstrations, events devoted to the value of the Constitution in the public life. And also, very interestingly, we see that this challenge requires a new methods of communication with citizens. So that's why we see how NGOs are using even such mechanisms like virtual reality to project what does it mean that there is a danger to the independence of courts, or new methods of communication via social media. We also see different developments at, let's say, international level in terms of transnational cooperation and networking, creation of the EU values funds, strategic use of the Norwegian money. Please note that in Poland this money is really important, and as compared in Hungary, Hungarian government effectively blocked possibility of using Hungarian money for the NGOs purposes. And finally, I would like to mention the growing use of crowdfunding, including financing of new private media. So there are some new media outlets that are basically financed by the people without any strategic, of course, without any public money, obviously, but simply as a result of this massive funding of individuals. So here we should mention, on the one hand, new private radio stations like Radio Nowy Świat and Radio 357, but also OKO.press, the internet portal OKO.press, and I think it was a very smart decision of Mr. Piotr Pacewicz to start OKO.press just after the changes in 2015 in Poland, because right now it is one of the major information sources for the public discussions. So here you see on this picture Judge Tuleya. So he is in this T-shirt from Tour de Constitucja. It was article in Guardian, last stop for democracy on tour with Poland's rebel judges. I wouldn't say that they are so much rebel, but in fact, Tuleya, being a judge who is still suspended, I think this year he was attending more or less like 40, 50 cities where this Tour de Constitucja was present, and he's basically treated as this kind of a heroic guardian of the rule of law in Poland, and he portrays what does it mean to fight for the constitution. So here I would like to move a little bit into the civil society and the rule of law issue, because those methods I've mentioned are more or less like general, but I think the response to the rule of law challenge was very strategic. So I think one thing what we can see is that we have moved from street protests to rather legal actions. So this energy of protests evaporated to a great extent because of different reasons, but it doesn't mean that legal groups or non-governmental organizations forgot about the cause. What is quite interesting in Poland that we see the emergence, maybe not emergence, but like a strong position of independent legal organizations like the associations of judges and prosecutors. So those names like Justitia, Temis, Lex Super Omnia, which is the association of prosecutors, extremely courageous people, because they know that it requires just one single legislative piece to dismantle them, to declare them as acting illegal, or to kick out them from the prosecutor's profession. But still there are 200, more or less 200 prosecutors that are active in this Lex Super Omnia association. We have also, we see that there are some independent, either well-established or newly created NGOs that are on the scene of fighting for rule of law. So Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights was in Poland always, also one of this, let's say, Soros family organizations. But for example, Free Courts Initiative is a very new idea and a very recent organization with a lot of successes. Also, important role of the Bar Association, and here I come to that those organizations are not working just here, but they try to cooperate as much as they can with international partners by making different networking or supporting each other, including involvement of the academia members. So there is, for example, one law professor whose name is Laurent Pesch from the Middlesex University. Now he's from Sutherland, from Dublin. And he has created such an organization which is called Good Lobby Profs, so Good Lobby Professors, and he's really strategizing legal discussions at the European Commission level and involving on a pro bono basis legal scholars in order to fight for the rule of law. And here I come to role of strategic litigation. Please note that in 2017, I remember those discussions, it was a strategic decision at that time that because we do not have any longer constitutional code and because we cannot count on the political process so much, we should do everything what is possible at the level of the EU Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights in order to win win cases concerning judges being subject of reprisals, judges that were suspended, judges that were subject of disciplinary proceedings. So specific organizations have been created in order to do it. Lawyers got engaged into the pro bono, mostly in pro bono cases. And interestingly, right now, in 2022, we are already having tens of cases decided by the EU, by Luxembourg or by the Strasbourg court. Today is a very interesting day because today European Court of Human Rights has announced just 2 hours ago a judgment in the case of Paweł Juszczyszyn, so he was one of those suspended judges. Why the case is important? Because for the first time in history, the European Court of Human Rights said that Article 18 of the European Convention has been violated. And now, most probably, it is this moment when you are switching off your attention because the lawyer has mentioned some specific article, okay? But I will tell you what is it about and why is it important. Because this is the provision which says you cannot use any provisions allowing for restriction of your rights for other purposes, simply for political purposes. So it is a guarantee that you cannot instrumentalize the legal system in order to achieve political purposes. And it is the first time in history where the European Court of Human Rights said it with respect to the Polish authorities. There were some attempts before to use this provision in Polish cases, but it never happened. Today it happened. For me, it is a important but also painful moment because I remember that I was using and I was referring to this Article 18 usually in cases concerning political prisoners from Azerbaijan, my good friends who were basically jailed in Azerbaijan, and apparently Poland is right now the country with respect to whom you can use that kind of argumentation. As a final point regarding the response by the civil society, I think civil society is in fact, in my opinion, the only civil society organizations are the only ones that are interested in holding politicians accountable for what they are going to do with the rule of law in the future, but also what is their response on a daily basis. Because somehow political opposition in Poland, that is my feeling, would like to even forget about all those problems and to concentrate on some other issues, while the civil society organizations are the ones who are all the time repeating, sorry guys, you have to take care about it because it is fundamental from the point of view democracy. And the second point I wanted to mention is that there is a very interesting connection between the past and the present, because this whole movement of lawyers and NGOs is having a significant moral support of the leaders of the Solidarity Movement, leaders of the Committee to Protect Workers of 1976. Can you imagine that when we were celebrating the 45th anniversary of the Committee to Protect Workers, they have prepared, those members who are still with us, they have prepared like official letter thanking contemporary human rights and rule of law defenders for their work. And Professor Adam Strzembosz, a very famous judge, is like a symbolic figure for the Polish civil society. Oh, so here you see one of the photos from from this time when still people were organizing big demonstrations in front of courts. A very symbolic picture made by Chris Niedenthal, a photographer that was famous and who made his name in the 80s. Right now, I would say, he came back to his artistic photography and political photography. So you see the building of the Polish Supreme Court and the slogan on the building of the court, which is made with the projector. It is our code. Okay, another point: civil society and illiberal change. Because rule of law is one thing. The other thing is attack on some values that are fundamental to liberal democracy, like women's rights, LGBT plus rights, position towards migrants and refugees. We can also, I think we should name also position towards national or ethnic minorities. Unfortunately, this attack on different sets of rights was supported by the Catholic Church. But once again, here we see emergence of new NGOs, emergence or maybe becoming more stronger of some social movements like Women's Strike, or appearance of a number of local LGBT plus organizations, also strategic involvement of NGOs helping at the border, first at the Polish-Belarusian border, then at the Polish-Ukrainian borders. And once again here, what we see over last years is that all those NGOs search for new remedies, new methods of actions. We see emergence of new activists as well as new initiatives. And it would be possible to give a number of examples, but I would like just to give you one, maybe not a very typical one, but in my opinion interesting. So one of the issues which we do not have in Polish schools is the sexual education. So as you can imagine, the traditional conservative government is not interested in promotion of the sexual education in schools. Moreover, there are strong fundamentalist organizations that are doing everything what is possible in order to pinpoint, in order to chill any directors, teachers that would be courageous enough to make proper sexual education in schools. So we have a little bit, but there is a need for this. There is a need because the society, young people need to have some basic knowledge about sexual activities, practices, and some basic courses on sexual education. So what happened is that we have an appearance on the scene of a new person, Ania Rubik, who is a famous Polish model, really like one of the top in the world, who established her own foundation, who became a face of the topic, who published a book, and suddenly she kind of filled in the space that is left by the state. So that is what is happening a little bit in some instances of the public life, that when the state is not active, when the state is not conducting some proper activities, some NGOs or some activists appear that fill in the space, or at least they protest against activities of the government. What is interesting is that some of those activities gain support of the Polish heroes. For me, one of the most interesting moments was 3 years ago, when Polish LGBT community was really heavily instrumentalized and attacked for mostly for the political purposes. But interestingly, these were Warsaw Uprising heroes that stood up and said, no, we are with you. We fought for the freedom, so we fought for the freedom also for you. In my opinion, it is quite difficult, on the one hand, for the state to make this conservative agenda, but on the other hand, to develop business communities. So sometimes you have a feeling that you are living in two different worlds. On the one hand, somebody in the government is talking how much it is against so-called, I don't know, gender ideology or some gender mainstreaming activities, while on the other hand, in the business community, all standards and practices develop as a result of the corporate social responsibility, or as a result of the pressure coming from some corporations from the top. So sometimes you have a feeling that the state is like going into like different directions because of the fact that business is so much connected, networked, and has different ideas and different expectations from customers that it cannot respond to the expectations, and it does not want to respond to the expectations of politicians. And finally, one interesting point concerning this illiberal change is the impact of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Some people claim that the reaction of the Polish civil society created like a picture that we are like one big NGO, that when the state is not operating, then NGOs are filling in the space. But I think this situation is also interesting from different angle, because I think some of the Russian type practices could be much more easily denounced and indicated in a very direct fashion. Like for example, if I hear right now some of the politicians claiming that they are going to introduce some restrictions on the foreign funding, it is nothing else than the foreign agents law from Russia. It is the same idea. And also to be honest, before the war, there were a lot of nationalistic attitudes towards Ukrainian migrants. Right now, this position and the level of sympathy is completely different, and I hope that that on the basis of this, the common future could be built. So here you have the picture of one of the protests. It is the demonstration that was organized by Marta Lempart and Women's Strike after the judgment of the Polish Constitutional Court on the access to abortion. But in fact, it is one of those last so big demonstrations that took place. I think it was 27th or October 2020. Okay, another point, disinformation and hate. Please note that the ruling party is having all different means of communication, public media, but not only, because due to either takeover of some media outlets by the Polish oil giant PKN Orlen, or because of the financing of right-wing private media outlets, the government has much more influence than just having in its hands public radio and television. Moreover, after 2019, there was a pressure of restricting independence of some television. So just exactly 1 year ago, we had a discussion about the deprivation of the license, broadcasting license for the major Polish independent TV. We have one interesting thing, thanks to which we can know what are the mechanisms, because one of the top ministers from the Chancellery of the Prime Minister has lost somehow passwords to his email account, and basically we have access to correspondence from his mailbox. We don't know who is basically providing this access and to what extent it is the action maybe of some GRU or maybe some other secret services, but still from the point of view of the Polish public opinion, we know what are the methods and how the government is operating, and sometimes we know, unfortunately, what are the methods of propaganda, increasing hate against political dissidents, political opponents. And one of the, I think we shouldn't forget about this, because if we talk about Poland, the year 2019 and the murder of Paweł Adamowicz is a very symbolic consequence of the disinformation and hatred that is present in the Polish public life. Okay, but what is the response to this? First of all, we see that the investigative journalism is growing, and journalists are not only effective in their role, but also they cooperate with international networks. Second, we see that because of this very obvious, very direct state television propaganda, the potential impact is limited, as one could think, taking into account the level of investment and the scale of the operation of the public television, and it is also connected with the crisis of traditional media. We see also the emergence of media based on new technologies, especially those media that are present just in internet. Unfortunately, due to involvement of different stakeholders, it was possible to defend the independence of the private television, TVN, and here I would like especially to mention the strategic role of the United States that were protecting not only the democratic values, but also simply their investment on the Polish soil. Another interesting point is to mention about the role of the European Union, because European Union, despite, I can be quite critical whether European Union was effective enough, but when you look from a certain distance, you see that European Union is still anchor for values. So Article 2, which says about such values like democracy, rule of law, equality, proved to be important because thanks to strong pressure from Polish judges, NGOs, lawyers, academia, it was possible to refer to this basic value of the rule of law, and also to transform the European Union from inside. please note that European Union has created mechanisms of response to the rule of law crisis, and it wouldn't happen if not the pressure by the Polish NGOs, if not the feeling that there is somebody here who is waiting for that kind of results. There were number of situations when you had a feeling that Commission is already gave up and didn't want to do anything, and because the pressure was still growing, there was a reaction both from the Commission as well as from the Court of Justice of the European Union. But interestingly, another aspect is equality, because this illiberal agenda required from the ruling party to discriminate against LGBT plus people and also to support that kind of traditional discourse also supported by the Catholic Church. And here, on the one hand, please note that the Polish law concerning anti-discrimination, that is a implementation of the EU directives, remained in fact untouched. Second, Polish courts became very much involved into those cases. So just to give you some impression, 2 weeks ago, one of the professors of law from the Warsaw University, Professor Jakub Urbanik, won his case with the current Minister of Education for the homophobic statements made by the Minister of Education. And interestingly, one strategy that has been adopted during those years was adoption of so-called resolutions against LGBT ideology in local communities and in Eastern and Southern Poland. And what was the reaction of the European Union? Okay, if you want to have that kind of resolutions, you can keep them, but it is contrary to EU law, and don't expect any money from us. So this connection of the money with values was important, and quite many Polish local governments decided to resign from those resolutions, but also Polish courts started to adjudicate those cases, saying that that kind of resolutions on so-called LGBT-free zones are simply contrary to the Polish constitution. But please note, even if I could be quite positive regarding this anchoring of the EU in values, still there were some moments when you had a feeling that some values are betrayed. And I don't understand why European Union was silent when we had this dramatic crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border. Why the European Union, being so much allegedly close to respecting basic human values, is closing eyes to deaths happening at the Polish-Belarusian border. Final point, please note that it is not just European Union. What was important was also the bilateral relations. I've mentioned already United States. Norway was, in my opinion, quite strategic in terms of sponsoring NGOs and supporting NGOs. But maybe I will come back with just one sentence to the United States of America. When the Polish government was instrumentalizing LGBT plus rights for the political purposes, there was a very important statement by the US ambassador in Poland, Georgette Mosbacher, who said, you know, dear government, we may cooperate on all different issues, but with respect to the LGBT plus rights, you are on the wrong side of the history. And it was quite interesting because I think Polish government did not expect it, that the criticism may come from somebody who is so close to Donald Trump, so from the Conservative Party. And it seems to me that from that time, LGBT cause, LGBT argumentation is used from time to time by ruling party, but not to that extent as it was in 2019. So maybe it is not any longer such a strong political weapon as it was before. And here, just one photo. Maybe I will just say why I have chosen to put this photo. This is a photo of representatives of 4 different legal professions. So you see here a judge, legal advisor, prosecutor, and an attorney. So they have all different colors of their collars. It is the demonstration, so-called demonstration of March of 1,000 gowns in Warsaw. Please note that they are wearing their gowns, which was already a very radical thing to do, because basically judges and prosecutors especially should not wear gowns outside of the courtroom. But this demonstration was interesting because it was attended by representatives of judges from almost all EU member states. In my opinion, it was, I think, the most pro-European demonstration that happened in this part of Central and Eastern, that happened in Poland or maybe in other Central and Eastern countries, because it showed that European integration is not just an abstract value, but it is really very much about supporting independent institutions. Okay, and final point about the civil society cooperation with international organizations. Poland trying to be a civilized, democratic, or pretending at least to be a civilized, democratic country, of course, is a member of international organizations such as Council of Europe, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or United Nations. And it is important from the point of view of the work of NGOs, because on the one hand, they may cooperate with those organizations by in preparation of different reports, in submission of their own shadow reports, in reporting before UN treaty bodies, by cooperating with UN special rapporteurs. And it was important, and I had this feeling that if you cooperate, you have still this feeling of attachment to values of a liberal democracy. So even if some bad things happen here, you still have a feeling that somebody wants to listen to you and somebody is ready to tell you, yes, that is what is happening here is wrong from the point of view of international standards. Moreover, those international organizations quite often provided real support to human rights defenders and activists that were present at the border, that were or to judges that were subject of reprisals. And a very symbolic scene took place just 2 weeks ago. It was 1 week even. It was 27th of September when there was a hearing before the European Court of Human Rights. And in this hearing, there were 5 Polish attorneys and civil society activists that were claiming that Polish law on surveillance is contrary to human rights standards. But, what is striking to me is that you had this kind of a feeling of dignity, that simply they represent themselves, saying that law is simply wrong, and at the same time, they know that it is their court, the European Court of Human Rights, and that they shouldn't be fearful that something wrong may happen to them. So what I'm trying to say that in the situation when Poland was all the time trying, and is still trying to pretend of belonging to a family of civilized democratic states, it creates still a possibility for a regular activity of the civil society, and it is up to the civil society how to use this potential and this possibility. I say this because I know that that kind of activism is not possible any longer in a number of other countries, and sometimes we do not appreciate that we have still this possibility of being involved at the international scene. I think that sometimes the position of international organizations is forgotten in terms of their relationship with the European Union. In my opinion, European Union would not be so strong on rule of law or equality issues if a certain message would not be directed from other international organizations. Okay, what are the conclusions? I think that the first one is that which is quite obvious, that the civil society may play an important role in protecting democracy. But please note that it is a little bit a situation of repairing sails of the boat during the storm. So, for example, one of the components of this reaction is the civic education. How can you do a proper civic education when institutions are subject of distraction and when the basic principles of democracy and rule of law are undermined? So how can you think about the future when the presence is subject of such a danger? I think the second conclusion is that we should really read once again Timothy Snyder, 21 lessons for the 21st century. I really like the lesson number 2, which is protecting institutions. And it seems to me that Polish citizens really knew how to do it. Even I have my personal feeling that there were a number of situations when my position was undermined, and I could feel this support of citizens. The next point is that you cannot achieve all of this without some basic political rights and free speech. So if Polish state would continue with restriction on freedom of association, on freedom of assembly, on free speech, it wouldn't be possible for that kind of activity to take place. So that is why so important to protect those basic fundamental political freedoms, because without this you cannot imagine the resistance by the civil society. Moreover, the civil society has learned some new resistance techniques and has used, in my opinion, effectively international networking. And in this respect, the funding for NGOs and for private media is of fundamental importance. I could imagine many more activities of Polish NGOs if the funding would be better, if the funding would be secured. And even this, I mentioned already, this comparison concerning Poland and Hungary regarding access to Norwegian money, it really makes a strategic change in the operation of the civil society. Having said this, I must say that in my opinion we are living in a system of so-called competitive authoritarianism, which means that the political opposition is playing on so-called uneven playing field with the current government, with the incumbent. Because of a number of reasons, I said already about media, use of public resources, use of state-owned companies, money controlling of different institutions. But still, competitive authoritarianism theory claims that even if you are having the system, there is still a possibility to win. The question is whether all those practices of the civil society, hopefully combined with the activism of and strength of the political opposition, is enough to compete on equal and fair terms in upcoming 2023 parliamentary elections. If it is not enough, then I think everything what I have said regarding the resistance of the Polish civil society may just evaporate after 2023. In 2024, it will be a completely different Poland if this government, if this ruling majority gets another window of opportunity to continue changes to make anti-democratic institutional reforms and making the civil society smaller and smaller, or putting the whole civil society into some enclaves in which this society will not have any impact whatsoever on the decision making. Thank you very much for your attention, but hope is here.